So, my guest today is Florence Nash. I don't even know where to begin with Florence. She's an award winning poet, a writer, a musician, a lover of all things that involve the arts. But most of all, she is someone who thinks deeply about life and the consequences and responsibilities that go along with the choices that we make. She was raised at a time when women were expected to simply get married, have children, and dedicate themselves to being a good wife and mother. But according to her bio, Florence was never quite sure where she fit into this life. And I think this is something a lot of women can relate to. She comes highly recommended by my dear friend John. Florence, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Florence, one of the things that I love is when I can get someone on the show who is my parents' age, because I get to learn a little bit more. It gives me glimpses kind of how they grew up. My mom's passed, but my mom did grow up here in the South in North Carolina. And my dad is 84 and you're 83, right?
Right.
Okay. So I want to dive into so many of your experiences in the arts. But first of all, let's talk about your background. You grew up in Tarboro, which for a lot of people who don't know that, that was really the center, one of the centers of tobacco farming.
That it was. Tobacco, pigs, what else? Peanuts.
So what
Right.
was your life like growing up in Tarboro?
Well, you know, I love the saying, whoever discovered water, it wasn't a fish. I don't really know. It was just growing up. I like to say, I was sort of a river rat. I grew up on the Tar River. We had a canoe. My mother would, here's something I think about with nostalgia and sadness. When I was fairly young, probably 11 or 12, I remember we put the canoe on top of the car. My mother would drive us out a couple of miles in the country to Shiloh Farm, help us get the canoe in the water, give us our sandwiches, and say, I'll meet you at the pumping station at 4 o'clock. Don't be late. And we, three little girls would spend the day on the river, no life jackets. And the assumption was, and we all knew how to swim, the assumption was if we ran into some kind of trouble, the banks of the river were lined with these old geezers, wetting a line and sitting there and passing the day and chatting. And the assumption was if we got in trouble, they would jump in and help us.
Somebody would help because everybody
Somebody
knew
would help
everybody.
Because everybody knew everybody, and the world seemed fairly benign. And now, my mother used to look back over her shoulder at that and say, now I would be arrested for criminal child neglect.
Absolutely.
And the assumption is that if anything happened, all of those men would jump into the river like Deliverance, and
Yeah, exactly.
And so I look at those years as sort of blissfully free of a lot of the anxieties and stresses, and you'd go out to play and you had to, your mama says be home before dark.
Yeah, and I mean,
That's
I
about it.
really actually lived in that time as well,
Yeah.
because we had that kind of childhood of, when the dinner bell rings or when it starts to get dark, that's when you need to come back in,
Right.
and just run free in your neighborhood. What
I
kind
was a
of
free-range child.
what kind of work, was your family into?
My father had a family business that was insurance and savings and loan.
So not
Real
farming.
estate, not farming, no. We were city folk, if you can talk about
Okay,
city.
okay. So how did you get from that tiny town, the tobacco farming town, to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill?
Oh, well, I went to St. Mary's, as did my mother and my sisters and both grandmothers.
Which is
And
in
don't
Raleigh,
get me started.
for people who aren't from North
girls'
Carolina.
School. And interestingly, at that time, it was a 4-year school, but it went from the junior year in high school through the sophomore year in college, because when I went there, you couldn't go, women or girls as we were then, could not go to to Chapel Hill as freshmen unless they made, if I remember correctly, and I misremember a lot of stuff, but I think if you were, if you majored in library science, education, or went to nursing school, then you could go as a freshman because they were suitable female occupations. Otherwise, you had to wait until your junior year. And so I think St. Mary's was skewed over those 4 years, partly as a sort of feeding, as a training ground or holding area for young women who wanted to go to Chapel Hill. So I went to St. Mary's and then to Chapel Hill in my junior year. And then my mother had had the great good fortune. We had a distant cousin who had gone to Paris in the 20s when all the bright young things went after the war, and she fell in love with France, and she never came home. And she eventually opened a residence for foreign young lady students at the Sorbonne. And so my mother went to St. Mary's and then went to the Sorbonne for a year. And then my sister did the same, and I thought that was my birthright, that I was going to get to go. But Miss Sarah unfortunately died in the interim. And so I thought, well, don't I get to go anyway? And my parents let me, when my graduation present from Chapel Hill was a Olivetti slimline portable typewriter and a ticket to France.
Those are pretty good
They are
presents.
pretty good presents. And I was going to starve in a garret and become a great writer.
As many have
Yes.
have wished to do before.
As many hope for and
Yeah.
few do. I was not one of the ones that became a famous writer, but I did sort of scuffle around in Paris and find sort of pieces of jobs and found a couple of family friends that would have me in and make sure I was still alive and give me tea. And then when I came back, I had a number of friends who had come to New York after graduation. It seemed to me that when you got out of Chapel Hill, if you majored in education, you'd go to Atlanta and be a teacher. If you majored in, I guess, history or politics, you'd go to Washington and see if you could get a job as a sort of junior aide to some friendly congressman. And if you majored in English, you went to New York and you got a entry-level assistant job in a publishing company. So
And what did you majored in
I
English?
majored in English, and I went to, my first real job was as an editorial assistant at Holt Rinehart in Winston in the college textbook division. And when they passed the Equal Opportunity Act in 60-something, the field reps, the people who went to college campuses both to try to sell, our textbook for Psychology 101 and to find out what the hot curriculum things were, who are the people we want to sign, what are the trends in college curricula. It was all white men, and they had to get a token girl,
Every time. Oh, wow.
and they had to get a token minority. And the marketing manager says, so they asked me, would you like to go to California? We'll give you a car. And the marketing manager was said to have exclaimed that it was sort of the most stupid damn idea he'd ever heard of in his life. So if we had to get a girl, we'd send her to California because everybody in California was crazy. And so
they would be
if it
okay
worked,
with a
they'd be
female.
okay. So I went to California as a girl book rep and met this dashing, fabulous artist and quit my job. Oh, the marketing manager said, you can't send a girl out there because she'll get all broody and lonesome and meet some guy and marry and
Have children.
Have children and quit the job and the territory will go to hell. I fulfilled his every
You
prediction.
fulfill. And what year was that, Florence?
I went out in 67 and came back in 87.
So being in California at that time, though, in the 60s and the 70s, with everything that was going on in history and the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and everything, I mean, that had to be a really interesting time.
It was mind-blowing. I mean, I was so ignorant. I mean, my horizons were all sort of rosy and nice, but sort of small. And I mean, that sounds strange to say for somebody who had, knocked around Paris for a while, but I didn't learn very much. I mean, I had not been in a world, embedded in a world that was so different from the one that I was raised in. And then California in the 60s and 70s was a roller coaster ride. I mean, my first date with my husband was a peace demonstration in Palo Alto. One of my first trips onto a campus, San Jose State, I remember I got tear gassed because there was a demonstration against DuPont, I think. And I fell into, a population of people who were out on the edge trying to figure out, can we make a new world? And if so, how? And everybody was kind of hairy and stoned and idealistic. And I was like from Tarboro.
Yeah, but what a fascinating experience
Oh,
to have,
yeah.
life
It was great.
experience.
It was great.
Be careful of the table when we hit the table.
Oh,
It knocks
okay.
the mic. Yeah, so I talk with my hands too, so I have to constantly tell myself that. I think living in places shapes us, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you
Oh,
were
yeah.
there for what, 20
I was
years?
there I was there for 20 years, but 1 year of those 20 we spent actually, I went out in 67, married my husband in 68, had twins in 69, and when the twins were 2 months old, we left for a year in England because he had a Fulbright, teaching Fulbright in Nottingham, and that he had applied for before we even got married. And we had to push the date a little bit so I wouldn't be leaving with two newborns. But
Understood,
yeah,
yeah.
we spent a year in England, and then we spent a year, he went back. He'd never been abroad, I don't think. And we traveled some in France while we were in England. And he just loved it. So he decided he'd take a sabbatical year, and we went back and spent a year in Paris for him to work with a printmaker who had a well-known studio in Paris. So, yes, it was 20 years in California, of which 2 were spent overseas.
And during this time, is this when your love of the arts really started to blossom?
I guess. Yes, here's another thing about my husband. He was a new kind of man. I knew Southern men. I don't think I knew any man who had ever seen the inside of a diaper,
Oh, okay.
or who sort of helped with housework and stuff like that. And he said to me one time, before we got married, he said, I get up every morning and I go off and I do something to earn a living that I would pay people for the privilege of doing. I love what I do every day, because he made his living teaching art and producing art. And he said, if we're going to live together, if we're going to have a life together, I want to know that you have something in your life that feeds you as much as what I do feeds me.
That's
Good
extraordinary.
Lord, good grief. And so I thought, well, I used to play piano a lot. I couldn't think of anything I'd done that was, and I wasn't seriously writing then, but I was doing a little writing. And so, when I got to California, I got very interested in early music. There was a sudden sort of surge of interest in sort of Renaissance and Baroque music. It was particularly in California. And so we built a harpsichord from a kit, and I became a harpsichord player on a pretty crappy harpsichord, actually. But I got involved in making music with people, and then I got a job as secretary to the chairman of the music department at Stanford, which immersed me in more music because they very kindly let me audit classes, and and I was working on I could go on and on. Stop
But
me
I
if
mean,
I'm...
this became a lifelong
Yes,
passion.
it
But
became
then,
music and also poetry, because I also started writing. I was feeling a little far from Tarboro occasionally, partly because, I will say this, I'm jumping around from topic to topic, but when I left the South thinking, let me get out and see some slightly wider horizons, let's see what else is going on beside Tarboro. When I came back to the South, it was largely to come back again into the embrace of what had chased me away in the first place, which is network, family, all up in everybody's face, and everybody knows your business and you're kin to most of them. And that, after living in California, was such a comfort at a time when comfort was
Yeah,
at a
and you came
premium.
back
But
in
I
'86.
came back in
And
'87.
you, 87,
Yeah.
and had your marriage ended at this point?
My marriage had ended a couple of years before. Yeah.
And how many
And
children did you have?
I had the two children, the
Okay.
twins who were born in '69, and I waited until they were through high school and leaving the nest. So I mean, I didn't mean to, I wasn't like waiting for them to get out of high school so I could come back to North Carolina. The coming back to North Carolina was not known at that time to be a permanent move.
And you came because your sister was
I came
ill.
because my sister was ill and clearly not going to get any better. And excuse me. So what I had thought was accommodating an event for a sort of indeterminate time and being here for a while just turned out to be kind of
The rest of your life.
the rest of my life, yeah. But I was also going to say that a friend, while I was in California and I was beginning to get involved as a volunteer and stuff in the arts, like sort of joining committees and fundraising and stuffing envelopes and stuff, a friend took me to a poetry reading at a local art center, and it was this poet who read poems about growing. She read a poem about being a small town girl in the South in the hot summertime when you walk along the street barefooted and the asphalt at the edge of the street it's so
Bubbling
hot
up.
that it's kind of bubbling up and melting. And I just had this surge of sort of nostalgia. And so I went up to her afterward and I said, hey, I'm from there too, and do you teach people how to do that? She was at that time head of the poetry thing at San Francisco State, and it was Frances Mays who wrote, Under the Tuscan Sun.
Oh, wow.
But she was out in California for a long time, so I joined a poetry workshop with her. So she was my first poetry teacher, and she now lives in Hillsborough. She's not from North Carolina, but she's here now.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. My mom, I shared with you before we went on, was from Concord, North Carolina.
Yeah.
And when she was dying 12 years ago, I asked her some of her early memories. And she had always dabbled in writing, so her storytelling was great.
Yeah.
And she said that she remembered that they didn't wear pants when she was growing up. And so to play, you wore a dress. And she said she remembers being barefoot with her sister running through a field. She said she was in a blue dress, and she could, if she closed her eyes, she could feel the tall grass hitting her legs. And,
Wow.
that imagery
That's a
makes
point.
me think of poetry, right?
Sure,
I think that's
sure.
what you're referring to. So you come
Yeah.
back to North Carolina.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be temporary. How did it become permanent again?
I don't know. I mean, first of all, I just thought, because I had lived in New York, I don't know, yes, I did tell you I lived in New York for about 5 years, and before the publishers sent me as the token girl
To California.
To California. And when I came back, well, when my marriage ended after 17 good years, and I was just contemplating, all right, how about the rest of my life? What next? California never felt like home in the sense that I understood home, that I experienced it as a small town Southern girl. You could live next door. We had people who built a house in the lot next to ours, and they were nice, and their names were, like Jeff and Pat or something, and we smiled, and we knew they were Jeff and Pat, and they knew we were Florence and Ray. I don't think I ever knew their last name. They were our next door neighbors for years, and nobody seemed particularly surprised by that. And my God, to come back into this hotbed, this tangled web of kinship and proximity and shared culture and history felt like just a warm blanket at a time when I kind of needed a warm blanket.
That makes
It
sense.
felt good to be here. And so I say the same things that drove me away from the South
Brought you back.
brought me right back.
And you didn't settle in Tarboro, though.
I didn't settle it. No, I needed a job, and I had been when I left. By the time I left California, I was assistant to the dean of the Stanford Medical Center, and so it being a small, tight world, he was very generous in helping me get good interviews and things while here. And so when I came, I was hired as the assistant to the dean of the medical school at Duke. And I stayed there. And that's another thing that got me into the arts. Am I talking too much?
You're doing great.
When
I'm fast. I could listen to you all day.
Well, unfortunately, so could I. When I came to work at the medical center, the dean said, now you're an English major, you do all this stuff. He said, these people keep coming to me now. There was a new movement in medical curriculum to inject a little of the humanities that was getting a little bit too numerical and technical and impersonal. And so they wanted medical education to include more of the humanities, to sort of soften the boundaries. And
So it wasn't all science.
so it wasn't all science. And so they hired a woman who became one of my first and best friends. I say she's one of the secular saints in my life who has contributed to my life being as fun and interesting as it has been. She was a painter and an educator, and I think she started the Committee for Arts in the Public Schools in Durham. And the Siemens family, the Duke family, went to her and said, we want to hire you at Duke Medical Center to create something, an entity in the medical center that will function the same way that an arts council functions in a town. And that is, it will advocate for local artists. It will figure out every possible feasible way to enrich and improve the lives of the people in this community through the arts. This is not not arts medicine, like
Not related
you have a
to
room
it.
full of people
Right.
weaving baskets as therapy. It wasn't that at all. It was make an art, instill the presence of the arts. Well, for one thing, Duke Hospital and its buildings have something like 3 or 4 or 5 running miles of wall space that you could
So
hang
plenty
things
of
on.
places for
Plenty
art.
of places for art. And my dean said to me, all these people, he said, you're kind of an artsy person. If anybody comes to this office and wants something from the dean's office, you're the one who deals with them. Well, I jumped in like go old small town, like a pig in mud. I loved it. I started working with the doctors who were engaged in this movement one way or another. And through that I think that's probably where my sense of one of the most useful things you can do during a day is doing something that advocates for the presence of the arts, in the community. So that's what I did,
So you continued really down the path of being involved in the arts and music in the last 3 decades, right?
Indeed.
What are some of the other things you've done?
Well, I've been on a lot of committees. I don't enjoy I'm not a good executive, but I'm a willing worker. And the things that I've loved, I've been on the board of a lot of things. The Choral Society, which I still sing in. The only thing I do now, the only music that I still do is I still sing in the Choral Society of Durham, which is celebrating its 75th year, I think. I've been with them 37 years and going. I'm not sure. I think I'm running out of wind. I think next year may be my last year. But have been on and off the board of the Mallarmé Chamber Players, whom I love. I mean, I love their mission being very much to advocate for the whole community, to mix arts. They're called Mallarmé after a French symbolist poet named Stéphane Mallarmé, who was a great believer that the arts are enriched to the extent that they are combined. Like if you can do something, if you can have a program that combines painting and dance or poetry and jazz, you know, everything.
You can enrich people's
You
lives.
enrich people's lives and you enrich the art itself.
What about the writing? Are you still writing?
I don't write nearly as much as I used to. Here's the thing, you know, I just was young for a long time and then I got old.
I don't believe that for a minute.
It's my current obsession, you know, with all these ways that I don't somehow seem to be functioning like a 40-year-old anymore. And one thing is just my mind's just getting lazier. It's just like
Maybe you're just taking a little rest.
maybe you think
Little
You
peace,
think?
having a little peace.
I would love to think
One
so.
of the things that was really intriguing to me about your bio, and I'm just going to read it.
Yeah.
This is one of your quotes that you wrote to me. You said, "The dominant themes of my inner life are a lifelong sense of being not fully either this or that, longing to come in and longing to get out, while being loyal to conflicting values. And number two, a gnawing sense that my unearned good fortune comes with obligations that I'll never adequately fulfill, and that I owe the world a tremendous debt at the same time that I pursue a high energy, pleasure seeking social life." What does that mean to you? Those two thoughts.
Well, they mean what I said, and they may be why I have been such a joiner of committees. You know, let me help here. You know, I mean, well, Durham, this area. Who knew when I left town? The little photo I carried in my head of life in the South was of a small town east of I-95 that did, you know, tobacco, peanuts, and pigs.
Who knew the Renaissance?
Who knew that the triangle was here? And I came back, and I do believe. I used to say all the time that I thought maybe the culturally richest area in the United States per capita was the Triangle in North Carolina, the Research Triangle. I mean, it wasn't New York City, but on the other hand, it wasn't even a big city, but it had per capita an enormously, both in volume and in quality, enormous cultural life that was so available. I mean, if you love it, join a committee. You know,
Go to
join
a
the
play,
board,
go to a
volunteer.
concert, right?
Yeah, but yes, consume the arts, but also help them
participate.
out. But,
Yeah, I mean, it's even changed so much since I went to Duke, graduated in 1988.
Yeah.
And Durham was still kind of a sleepy little town. And now, look at it. I mean, just
my God.
the arts have exploded there.
But so has the population.
Yeah, that
I'm
too.
not sure.
That too.
Yeah.
And Raleigh, I mean, the arts have exploded here too. And, you know, we love it here. You know, I think, Florence, one of the hardest things about being a woman and getting older is what you just said, that gnawing sense of kind of, who am I? Look at all the good that's happened to me in my life, but then what are my obligations?
How do you pay it back?
How do you pay it back? And then also I love how you describe that not being fully this or fully that. I left a 35-year career, and now I'm trying to figure out, well, what am I? Who am I? What do I lead with? What advice would you give to women that are going through transformation, trying to figure out what is the next chapter? Is there a next chapter? It sounds like you've had 101 chapters. You know, what would you tell women about that journey?
Oh gosh, Amanda, that's not fair. I have no answer.
What have you done when you would get to a spot where you thought, what's next? How would you figure that out? I mean, because culturally, even though we've come a long, long way since you're growing up in a small town, we still have, I think, cultural norms or societal norms where when women reach a certain age, it's like, okay, you've done all that, you had a job, you raised kids, go out right off into the sunset. But a lot of women are like, no, I have more to offer. I'm not done yet.
I feel, well, I will say almost, I feel that everything I've done in my life has not been motivated by some oppressive weight of obligation. Most everything I've done I've done because it was fun. I mean, I want to join this committee. I've been invited to join this board. I want to lead a poetry workshop. I did that. Oh, that's another thing I did that I love very much. I just for this, well, for the Ollie program at Duke.
Oh, I've
I
worked
did
at the Ollie program at NC State.
Yeah, I did the poetry workshop for I think 15 years, and I loved it, and I was good at it. I think I'm probably a better teacher than I am a poet, but I was good at it because it was fun, and I love, if something gives me pleasure, I have a very strong impulse to want somebody else to know why this is so much fun, and you'll have fun doing it too. I wish I had known 50 years ago, 60 years ago, that how much I like teaching. I think I would have
Done more
that.
of it.
I would have
Yeah.
done more of it. But I will say, basically, follow what you're good at. I mean, follow what gives you pleasure. Oh, who is it?
11:43 a.m.
Thich Nhat Hanh, one of these people often quoted, the Dalai Lama or somebody says, your calling is where your joy meets the world's need. Excuse me. And I think about that, and I think if you're lucky enough to be able to do things that give you pleasure, and that you're fueled, you're motivated by simply the fact that it's fun, and at the same time that you're doing something that some other people may find useful, or you might look at you and think, shoot, that looks like fun, I think I'll do that too. Then why not? And so I don't feel that I've had a life full of hardworking, virtuous crusade for the common good. I think I've been lucky enough to like doing things.
To align your values and
my-
your
yeah,
passion with
yeah.
things that help.
Yeah,
I think that's a great way of looking at it. And I think that those of us that have the luxury of maybe a little space and time to think about, okay, what's the next step? What do I want to do? I mean, obviously, people need to work, they need to pay the bills, they need to do those things. But eventually, if you can get to a place of having that ability to discern, okay, what gives me joy and what is something that gives others joy, that's a pretty powerful combination.
yeah.
That's great. Well, anything on your bucket list, Florence?
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, I love to travel, and I have not, well, I was going to say I haven't traveled significantly since the pandemic, but that's not true because I went to, the Choral Society went to Chile and Peru
Oh,
last
fantastic.
October, and with my 83-year-old lungs, sang a concert at 12,000 feet in the Andes where there ain't much oxygen up there.
I can't imagine.
And the Choral Society has been fabulous all the years I've been singing with it. Starting in 1993, I have sung in Russia, Israel, Austria, Cuba, Brazil, Argentina, that with another choir, Chile, Peru. I think that's it.
That's pretty
Israel.
amazing.
It's pretty
That's
amazing.
a great
It's
amount of
pretty
travel.
amazing. It's wonderful travel, and it's travel with
A purpose.
a purpose. Yeah, I love to say I want to be a traveler and not a tourist. And when you bring something like that, and through it you collaborate with the people there and have meals with them, or maybe stay in their houses. It's incredibly enriching. I mean, it's very exciting. I would like to travel more, but I just took an experimental. I tried out Rhodes Scholar the end of April. I went to the Grand Canyon, which I'd never seen, and I just thought it's kind of un-American not to have ever seen the Grand Canyon. And so I thought I'll do a modest commitment to a Rhodes Scholar trip to see, how it
What
is.
that's like.
Sorry. And I loved it, but I came back chastened. I realized I'm not, big breaking news, I am not 40. I am in my 80s, and I won't be making big trips alone. I love France, and I used to go back to France every year and do this little podunk village, this little Tarboro of France, and rent a little house and help people pick grapes and stuff. And I hadn't done that since before the pandemic, and I'm thinking, I don't believe I can do that again the way I've done it before. I mean, just take the red eye, rent the car, drive through.
I'm sure maybe your kids will want to go.
Well, they've been. I mean, I've always had family or friends join me there for part of the time. And in fact, my son right now is saying, okay, let's go back to San Chinian. Come on, Mom, let's do another trip, because he's heard me saying,
how fantastic
I really want to go back,
is.
but I don't, and I haven't quite got my head around the fact that
it's a big undertaking.
get a grip, Florence. There's more years on you than you used to be. And there are some diminishments of energy and organization and stuff. I can't believe I'm saying all these things.
Well,
recorded for the ages, but
I think they're things that people can relate to.
Yeah.
And I think they actually start way before 83. So I think it's the kind of thing that you work up to, unfortunately. But you're very self-aware, and it sounds like you have a lot of love and support from your family and friends.
Very much.
Any parting thoughts? Anything that we didn't cover?
I'm now going to be plagued with, sort of second thoughts, departing thoughts. Oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Because I feel so fortunate. And I think, if I'm here, you're asking me to sort of come up with words of wisdom. And I think, well, it's from the context of someone who's so lucky.
I think you already have come up with a lot of words of wisdom. The secular saints thing is sticking with me. That I can't forget that. I can't unhear that. That was great.
Yeah.
But it really has been a joy to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, likewise. This is an extraordinary experience.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way, because I feel honored that you're sharing your time and your story with me, and I think people will relate to a lot of what you've experienced and gone through.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been great.